These sanctuary policies are the root of the cause of violent crime in our country, in LA. We saw it with the riots. We had to send out DEA, FBI, ATF, our U.S. Marshals, jeopardize their safety to help enforce the laws of Los Angeles. We have sued New York, Illinois, Colorado, New Jersey, and now we've sued Los Angeles, and we will continue to sue you if you do not follow the laws of our country.
You heard it there. Trump's feud with California continues in the wake of the mass anti-ICE protests in early June. The DOJ is now suing the city of Los Angeles and its mayor, Karen Bass, over its so-called sanctuary city policy.
That policy was passed in the weeks following Trump's election victory last November and prevents city resources from going toward immigration enforcement. In a statement Monday announcing the policy, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, "Jurisdictions like Los Angeles that flout federal law by prioritizing illegal aliens over American citizens are undermining law enforcement at every level. It ends under President Trump."
In response to the suit, Los Angeles City Council member Hugo Soto Martinez said in a statement to Politico that Trump is, quote, "trying to force every city and town to help him carry out his white nationalist agenda." Soto Martinez goes on to call the suit baseless and said that the only thing it gets correct is that, quote, "we refuse to stand by and let Donald Trump deport innocent families." Probably differing opinions here, I suspect. Amber, what do you think of all this?
Well, I'm sort of unclear on how this lawsuit will proceed on a legal standpoint, but I think politically it's obviously in line with what the Trump administration has been talking about with regards to illegal immigration. And I think it's no surprise to you that I don't agree with sanctuary city policies. The only, I think, aspect that they would have in the lawsuit is they could make the argument that because LA's policy directly interferes with federal law enforcement operations, that would be considered illegal and outside of states' rights.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. Firstly, we disagree on sanctuary city policies, and as a reminder to those in the audience who might not be aware of what the rationalization is for sanctuary city policies, it is basically the idea that you don't wish to disincentivize people who are in the country without authorization from telling the police about crimes that they witness or have information about. That's the fundamental rationale that underpins it. Now, in this particular case, it seems to me that the Trump administration is alleging that the sanctuary city law is the root, as Pam Bondi said in that clip, of the problem. Whereas it seems to me, in fact, that the crisis, such as it is in Los Angeles, has in fact been generated or confected by the actions of the Trump administration. So you have the raids on, parking lots of Home Depot and so forth, things that have got even people like Joe Rogan, who I think we spoke about before, kind of outraged or thinking that this isn't what he voted for. Those raids elicit protests. The protests then create this situation where the National Guard is deployed, I would argue further inflaming the situation. And those two factors, the raids, the nature of the raids themselves and the deployment of the National Guard, creates a problem that Pam Bondi then blames upon the sanctuary city law. And one final point, Amber, which is, you mentioned interfering with federal law enforcement. It seems to me there's an important distinction to be made between interfering with and not assisting. And if you look at the actual decree from Karen Bass that declared this status, it mentions on at least a couple of occasions that the city will not assist unless there are warrants issued in one instance or unless to comply with federal law. So it's, to my mind, a passive non-assistance, not an active obstruction.
Yeah, so a few things in response on the sanctuary city point regarding people who would report crimes to the police. The counterargument to that would be that if an individual who has committed a crime or is accused of committing a crime is detained by police officers, the sanctuary city policy prevents them from holding someone for a longer period of time to allow ICE time to get there to detain them for immigration proceedings,
Right.
which can cause them to be released from custody,
That's true.
but which requires, to an extent, ICE going into communities and finding these individuals rather than picking them up from the jail facilities or from prisons, which could arguably create these conditions where ICE is conducting quote-unquote raids. Now, on the instance that led to the protests in LA, there was some misinformation from a local California lawmaker who made the claim that they were raiding Home Depot parking lots. But what really happened was that ICE did have warrants for accused and convicted criminal illegal aliens. So when they went in to serve those warrants and to find the individuals that they were looking for, the misinformation about the Home Depot parking lot, which was what sparked the protest, so that people were blocking ICE from then serving those warrants and taking those people into custody. So they would go into a home, for example, that had an illegal alien who was a convicted criminal that they were trying to serve a warrant on. And as they were leaving, the protesters tried to block ICE from either getting into their cars or from going into an immigration facility, which is where the interference would come in. And I do think it's a little unfair to say that the Trump administration inflamed tensions, because the underlying logic to that point is that if people protest when you're trying to enforce federal immigration law, then you just can't enforce the law, or you can't send in the National Guard to put down riots because it might make people riot more. I mean, the logical conclusion of that is, okay, well, so we're not allowed to do anything about riots?
Well, no, so to take that point, first of all, the not able to do anything about riots. There, you were mentioning misinformation, another point about Home Depot, which I'll come to. One of the things that there has been persistent misinformation about is the conflation of what the Los Angeles police chief said about being overwhelmed with the false suggestion that he had called for federal reinforcements, which he most certainly had not. He had called for mutual aid from other local law enforcement agencies, which was provided, and he said handled the situation effectively. And he further said that the deployment of the National Guard had, quote, heightened everybody's level of anxiety. Now, in relation to Home Depot, there are a number of different Home Depots and a number of different instances, and there were other raids on various clothing stores and things of that nature. I think sometimes it gets tangled up between each particular individual instance, but I do think that the Trump administration behaved in an inflammatory way.
It's true that they have been doing those raids, but I think the important distinction is that that wasn't what happened when the protests started. It was a misunderstanding of what ICE was there to do that caused people to go out and start doing the riots. And regardless of this local police assistance, having reporters on the ground in Los Angeles, they were very clear that things were not under control. They were out there at night when the riots were persisting multiple days past the influx of those local police officers, and there were still people not abiding by curfews, still smashing windows, still setting Waymo cars on fire. So the videos from them, the testimony from those reporters makes very clear that it was necessary for the National Guard to go in.
I shall leave the last word with you.
I appreciate that.
It's the question of this century, and it's before the High Court once again. Can money be classified as free speech, and what's the limit? The new case before the Supreme Court next.